program today. Thank you all for coming. It's a beautiful day out, which we all know means the beginning of March is going to be nice. That means the end of March is not going to be. So our program today, I want to thank our sponsor, Pat Bowman, for helping with this. And Bob Laprelle, he has been in the railroad business for over 30 years, I believe, and loves historic railway preservation and museums. He's the director of the Museum of the American Railroad in Frisco. And I cannot even imagine, if y'all know, it used to be in Dallas, but it had to have been a nightmare getting it from there to Frisco. I mean, we're not talking about little things. So yeah. And so he's going to tell us all sorts of fascinating railroad tidbits. And he attended the University of Texas at Austin, majoring in government and public policy. Also did internships at the LBJ Presidential Library Museum, and is past president of the Association of Railway Museums, and is immediate past president of the Heritage Rail Alliance. He also represents railroad museums at the American Alliance of Museums Council of Affiliates, and is currently president of the London-based World Association of Tourist Trams and Trains. So without further ado, I want to introduce Bob.
Thank you. Appreciate that. See if my water will stay here. So it's great to be here. With me today is Kelly Murphy, and she also works at the museum, and she put this program together. So proud to have this assembled. And what we're going to talk about today is Dallas Union Terminal. How many of you have gone through Union Station at one point in Dallas? Okay, a lot of hands going. Okay. So you know that the building survives, which is great, because in Dallas, not a lot of historic structures have survived. You know, Dallas has a reputation of tearing down its past and embracing the future, which is great to keep the city relevant and moving forward. But Union Terminal, what they call Union Station today, thank goodness, is still with us, and there's some great stories to it. So this is kind of a pictorial history of Dallas Union Station. And I'm happy to take questions at the end if you'd like. There's a lot of history to it. So let's see. Let's get started. And let's see. All right. Okay. Just a little bit about the museum. As you mentioned earlier, I've been there about 30 some odd years. I've stopped counting. And it's amazing, you know, to have a career in a job where you look forward to getting up in the morning and going to work. I've been blessed with being able to do something that I really enjoy, and then also be able to put food on the table and keep the lights on. So our museum really does three things. We're a cultural tourism destination for Frisco and North Texas. We're an educational resource because we work with all the schools, mainly the Frisco School District and surrounding districts, everything from Louisville, Little Elm, you know, McKinney, Plano, all the districts, but mainly Frisco ISD. And then our principal role really is historic preservation. We have 65 actual cars and locomotives in our collection. We're bigger than some short line railroads as far as equipment roster. We have over 12,000 feet of track located within that 15-acre site. And basically what we do is we preserve our nation's railroad heritage. The big items, the small items, we actually have 2 historic structures on our location there in Frisco, as well as all of the smaller 3-dimensional supportive items like telegraphy instruments and paper items, photographs, manuscripts, you name it. So we are a collecting institution. We're not a museum where you bring in small traveling exhibits and you have a venue for them, you run them for a month and send them on to the next museum. We're not like that. We are very much collections and capital intensive in what we do. This is our mission, to enrich the lives of others through meaningful, relevant programs and exhibits that relate the diverse history and technology of the railroad and its profound impact on American life and culture. Try to make that as succinct as possible. That's a lot to take on as a museum. Very humble beginnings. We started at the State Fair of Texas in 1963 when that fair opened. The theme was Our American Heritage, and we debuted a restored depot that used to be in downtown Dallas that was displaced as a result of I-30 construction in Dallas, and a locomotive that was a gift to the Texas and Pacific Railroad back in the 50s that was already there, and then replaced with another engine. So very humble beginnings at Fair Park. That's a whole other story. Fast forward to Frisco. We moved to Frisco in 2011, 2012. And we went from 1.8 acres to, like I say, almost 15 acres where we are now. So we're growing, we're flourishing. It's a good story. Someday I'll come back and make a presentation on that because it is quite interesting, particularly the move and getting everything up there. So let's get with this program. When Dallas took the train, and this is really, like I say, it's a photographic history of Union Station, but it encompasses really the history of Dallas and how the city grew in the central business district as a result of the coming of the railroad. And Union Station, a wonderful edifice, really was known as the front door to Dallas. It was the first thing people saw when they came in on the train. It was the last thing they saw when they got back on the train and left Dallas. Of course, that's for visitors to and from the city, but you had residents as well that went all over the United States and began their trip and ended their trip right here in this wonderful building. It was designed by Jarvis Hunt and a great architect firm, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through it. Now, to begin this story, you really have to go back to the beginnings of Dallas and the coming of the railroad. Some of you may already know this story. When the Houston and Texas Central line was building north from the Gulf Coast up through Texas to the Red River, it came through Dallas. It was always on their map, always their plan to come through Dallas. But what really changed Dallas as compared to all of the other North Texas cities was the crossing of the next rail line just a year later. The HNTC came through in 1872, but through some very careful finagling in the Texas legislature by Dallas representatives, they were able to bring the Texas and Pacific line through Dallas and intersect the HNTC in 1873. And that's really what put Dallas on the map as opposed to McKinney or Ennis or any of the other cities. Dallas became a very important, vital rail junction, the first rail junction in North Texas. This is a quote from a gentleman who was coming down on the Katy from St. Louis, going through Indian Territory at that time, and that was what he wrote back to one of his family members when he arrived in 1873 in Dallas. This is one of the earliest known photographs of a train in Dallas. It's a T&P train. So before Union Station was built, you had the lines kind of building into Dallas from all directions. The first one was the HNTC, then the T&P, then you had the Cotton Belt line. It was one of the last lines to come in, I think, in 1902. But you started to have the confluence of all these different railroads coming into Dallas because it was now a center for industry and commerce in the Southwest, not just North Texas. So it became a very busy railroad town. This is, I believe this is the Katy Yards in downtown Dallas, what is now American Airlines Center in that general area there. So this is where the T&B and the HNTC crossed right here. As you can see, this photograph, which is a very famous image by the Dallas Public Library, you can see a lot of activity going on. You've got streetcars, you've got, I think that's an HNTC train coming in from the south right there. This is like the second or third station that was built at that location. It's a brick and stone building, and this one lasted up until the Union Terminal days. Sadly, it was demolished, and we'll talk about some of the other stations around Dallas. Dallas ended up with 6 train stations around the central business district before Union Station was built. So this was a really bustling area down there. That was about where I-30 and 75 kind of come together. So we'll talk about the other stations that in Dallas that predate Union Terminal. This is the Katy Station, beautiful building. Again, down there, not too far from where the American Airlines Arena is today. Wonderful architecture with that building. Then you had the Santa Fe Station. It was occupied by the Gulf, Colorado, and Santa Fe line, which is the Texas subsidiary of Santa Fe, and the Frisco Railroad. And it actually had a Harvey House in it as well. And this was closer over on Commerce Street. Then you had the Cotton Belt Station. And unfortunately, we do not have an image of the actual exterior of the building. This is back on trackside. Cotton Belt, St. Louis Southwestern, Chicago, Rock Island and Gulf, Trinity and Brazos Valley Railroads occupied this station. So around the central business district, if you had to change trains, you had to go several blocks to get to another station. And then the T&P and the Texas Midland had a station along the T&P line that ran on what is now Pacific Avenue in Dallas, and that was the station for those lines. And then you had the interurban station, the interurban building, which still stands today, to take the interurbans north and south, east and west out of Dallas, the Texas Electric and the Northern Texas Traction Company. This building has been repurposed. I think it's now lofts and commercial space in that building now. And I showed this picture for a reason, because all those buildings you just saw, with the exception of the interurban buildings, were demolished in Dallas. About the same time those buildings were constructed was the Santa Fe station over in Fort Worth. And there's an interesting thing about train stations and Union stations all over the United States. These buildings predated Union stations. LA, Denver, so many different cities. They had these smaller 1880s brick and stone masonry structures in major cities. Well, they all got torn down as a result of constructing Union stations. This is the only survivor in this part of Texas. The Santa Fe station still stands today in Fort Worth. It's now been repurposed for like a convention center and events center. But this is the only example in existence, really, in this part of Texas and part of the country with that unique architecture. It's been beautifully restored. Okay, so all these railroads, and you can see where we've highlighted coming into Dallas, just encircled the central business district, which was kind of pushing at the boundaries, growing and expanding. And you had all these trains coming in from all directions. You had them going down what is now Pacific Avenue, and it was beginning to choke the city. The very thing that led to Dallas's growth and massive population explosion was now choking the city. What to do about the railroad problem, and that's what it was known as back in those days. And something had to be done. Well, the city leaders and a lot of the businessmen and elected officials in Dallas came together, and they said, hey, we got to do something. This is not working, because you got trains going down streets with horses and buggies and people and everybody else along banks and the post office and everything else. You're competing with trains. So they hired a city planner that had been well known for laying out other cities around the United States to basically just replat and replan Dallas and do something about this problem. There were other issues facing Dallas, not just the railroads. So they created they hired Mr. Kessler, and he was going to master plan the city of Dallas. And he came up with a plan that was outstanding. I mean, Dallas literally is what it is today because of the Kessler plan. The Dallas Public Library has the original copy of it in their archives, which is quite interesting. And they basically came up with several major recommendations. One was a system of levees to prevent further flooding of the west edge of Dallas. The Trinity would get out of its levees when they'd had rainy seasons and flood all the way up into the western side of Dallas. It would cut off Oak Cliff, which was a separate city at that time. So the number one thing was to build a system of levees and put the Trinity River in its banks and try to continue to have it flow away from the central business district as it flows southwards. The next big thing was to build a belt railroad, which means they were going to build a line around the city and get all the lines out of the central business district and basically still serve downtown with a few little spurs coming in, but get all the main line traffic out of the central business district and go around the city. And then right below that was to build a Union station to get all the trains to go into one big station on the west side of town, as it turns out, and get all these passenger depots, basically out of the central business district. And then freight terminals. So you can see all of this was railroad related for the most part. And the interesting thing is, when they filled in the west side of Dallas as part of the levee project, that's where the Union Station ended up being built, was on that fill dirt when they pushed the river westward. So there was a lot in the Kessler plan that dealt with dealing with the railroad problem. About the only thing the city didn't do as part of this plan was to build a town lake, which was going to be where they would dam up the Trinity westward, where they pushed it beyond the boundaries of the city, they were going to have a lake there. And that's been cussed and discussed ever since. People have talked about, every now and then they try to float a bond project. It's never happened. I think it'd be great, but that's never happened. Everything else on the plan pretty much took effect. So when they started planning Union Terminal, they had to get with the railroads because they were going to have a significant role in not only building this, but also funding it. And that was somewhat tenuous discussions because the railroads didn't want to spend money on anything. That's just the nature of the railroad business. That was the culture. You want us to do what? And it finally got to a political point where the railroads said, okay, let's sit down, let's talk about this, let's see what we can build. And this is the original plan by Jarvis Hunt that they settled on. There were several different designs, several different layouts to come up with a station that was befitting of the city of Dallas in its stature in the Southwest. These are the original plans that came forth. It's loosely patterned on Kansas City Union Station. Jarvis Hunt also designed and built Kansas City Union Station, which is still standing today. It's a magnificent building. So you can see a lot of similarities with the archways and the stonework and the columns and so forth. And that really, the city leaders went to Kansas City, looked at this building and said, yeah, that's what we want. So that's how we arrived at the design and layout of Dallas Union Terminal. What did I just do? Right. But what you have to remember is that building you just saw is just right here. This is the only, but all of this is all new. All of the station facilities that went along with it, massive amounts of land had to be acquired, again, pushing the river westward, this is west, and then putting fill dirt in here. This is the old Texas and Pacific line right here that went down Pacific Avenue. They had to build some Ys where they could turn the trains, and then the actual station tracking facilities here, and then you had all your transitional trackage going into the coach yards and the roundhouse and everything that goes into servicing a passenger terminal. So it was much more than just building a building. It was a lot more. And that's where a lot of the cost of it was in. This is a blueprint of the station tracks and platforms. Here's the front of the station facing downtown, the station building itself. And you had express buildings, powerhouse, all types of other facilities, and then it had essentially 10 station tracks and platforms right here. Then you had some run-through tracks for through traffic right there. Then they'd go through the terminal traffic. So there was a lot to be constructed. This is very early on in the construction of the station. This is Houston Street right here. That's the brand new Jefferson Street viaduct right there going to Oak Cliff. And you can see the first floor is almost up on the terminal building itself. No improvements around it. I mean, this was, as you can see, this was kind of a rundown area back in here. And again, this is all floodplain. And the post office annex is yet to be built, but you can see the station right there. So construction began in 1914, and it was finished in 1916. And with great fanfare. I mean, this was a huge project for Dallas. This was sort of a milestone for the city, and had bragging rights because at that time it was the most modern passenger facility in the Southwest, and you know, really rivaled a lot of the big stations up in the Northeast. $6.5 million. Can you imagine? It had an entire article in the Railway Age Gazette, which was an industry journal when the station opened. So here it is, opening day. And what's interesting is all the other stations closed the day Union Terminal opened. It was a pretty amazing transition to get all those trains consolidated into one station, and they had to connect all those tracks from the perimeter of the city. So it was really a huge day for Dallas when this building opened, to realize some of the Kessler Plan's recommendations and actually bring them. A lot of cities do master planning and they never do anything with them, they just shelve these things. But the Kessler Plan was very relevant for the city. So it really was a gateway for the city of Dallas. Lots of dignitaries there, they had lots of speeches. And this is what I think is interesting here as we researched this and started discovering the politics of the time. Now that the railroads have shown their faith in Dallas and have spent all this money for their interests, the citizens should be in a reciprocative mood. That was George Dealey, who was the publisher of the Dallas Morning News and a very influential Dallas citizen. We must brush aside these petty prejudices and apply the golden rule in our dealings with the railroads as we should in our private relations. That was the governor of Texas. Stop complaining about the railroads. They did this. It's time to move on. So they started selling land around the station. They started doing a lot of development around it to establish commerce all around. And this ended up, the city kind of just moved towards the terminal, moved their businesses there, and it became the hub of Dallas very quickly. They started building hotels. Here's the station building right here with the trackage. The Jefferson Hotel was a very famous hotel that was almost right across the street. This building still stands today. I think it's called the Hotel Lawrence now. It was something else. But the Jefferson was demolished years ago. But as you can see, there's a lot going on around the station now where this used to be just kind of a you know, not ghetto, but it wasn't the greatest. So what was interesting is every single detail of Union Terminal was designed by Jarvis Hunt. The lighting fixtures, the door handles, those beautiful arched windows, all the detail, the millwork and everything, and all the plaster and cornice work was all designed specifically for that station. And if you walk through it today, most of that is preserved. It really is a magnificent building. This is a page out of the first Union Terminal timetable showing all of the station trackage and everything. This is the Cadiz Street Roundhouse, which was manned by the Southern Pacific Line. And all the railroads, there were 7 different railroads that went into building Union Terminal, that invested in it, that operated trains in and out of it. And they all had a role in managing it and also providing service facilities and staffing for the building. So it really was a joint venture by all the different railroads. This is TNT Junction right here, which is now Pacific Avenue in Dallas. And then all the trains that went southward and eastward went through the terminal trackage in this direction. It went on to Houston, and went on to St. Louis, and all points north and south. And then some of the trains, what's interesting about Union Terminal is it was oriented east-west, but all the trains went north-south. So it was kind of interesting. That's how it had to kind of traverse the edge of Dallas. And then a lot of the trains to Fort Worth went this direction, or TNT went this direction. The Cotton Mill and the Katy all went this direction going north. So it was like I say, it was kind of oriented opposite of what all the traffic, through traffic was. Just some more detail of the station. And so originally it was a multi-floor facility. The main waiting room, the grand hall, the concourse was all on the second floor, and all of the ticketing and baggage handling and so forth was on the first floor. And the ticket office had a wonderful round kiosk that you'll see here in a minute. This is the front of the building facing downtown Dallas. This is the rear of the building facing the terminal trackage. And then the steps going up to the main waiting room and grand hall. That ended up being sort of an undesirable aspect of the station from the day it opened, was that you had to encounter 2 levels and traverse all these steps. We'll talk about that in a moment. This is the second floor with the general waiting room. It was segregated at the time, but the waiting room was beautiful, and it had wonderful interior furnishings, the large oak benches, the beautiful chandeliers, and it really was, it was a 24-hour facility. We call it a city within a city. It had a barber shop, a restaurant, lunchroom, women's waiting room, smoking room, Pullman facilities. So when you came in the station on the first floor, you would come up the stairs and enter the general waiting room. The Pullman check-in desk was back here. This was your main concourse where passengers would flow from the waiting room into the concourse and then down the midway. I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, so these are some images out of the Railway Age Gazette. It had a baggage conveyor system, which at the time, 1916, that was a big deal to have a baggage conveyor system overhead. I'm not sure how successful it was because I don't see it in later photographs. These are the station tracks and then the butterfly train sheds and platforms. Back here is the concourse that runs over the top of it, like you can see it there. This is the ticket window, the ticket kiosk downstairs. That's no longer there, but it was designed to accommodate a lot of passengers, a lot of rail traffic. This is the upstairs waiting room, the Grand Hall. These are large radiators, all steam heat, I'm sure. Beautiful building. And this is the concourse that goes over the tracks. You would go down these, you can't see them really well, but here there were stairs going down from each one of these loading points and then going down to the various platforms to board your train. So what you had to do is go upstairs and then go all the way back downstairs. Just a few photographs of the building throughout the years. These are pretty rare views that have kind of surfaced in the last few years from the City of Dallas archives. And here you can see the sign that says restaurant. This is on the north end of the building. It was not a Fred Harvey restaurant. There was another company called the Union News Company that ran that restaurant for many years. This is the outside, what they call the lazarette, where you could walk out the double doors from one end of the Grand Hall, and you could actually sit outside, and you could view downtown Dallas through this opening here. Kind of a contemplative space while you're waiting for your train. Then next door to the station was the Postal Annex. This was built in 1936-37. Union Station is just out of the frame here to the left. But most big cities had a post office right next door to it. Fort Worth was the same way. Many Chicago, a lot of the cities were like that. So the Postal Annex was built to handle massive volumes of mail next to the station. It had rail tracks coming into it, so when passenger trains came in to Union Station, they could switch the mail cars off the head end of the train and shove them right into the post office unloading tracks right there next to it. It has beautiful WPA murals in it as well. It was built during the time when we had the WPA. The Hotel Jefferson, this is looking at the front of the station, and then the hotel just to the north of it. This is Ferris Plaza right here. And again, the Jefferson was torn down, which is kind of sad. A more detailed layout of the station tracks and so forth. Here's the Trinity River and its banks, and then your 10 station tracks, 14 tracks in all with the run-through tracks, and then all of the station facilities around it. You had Baggage and Railway Express, American Express, and then the power station. Union Terminal had its own power plant. It provided all its own electricity, boilers and steam generators and so forth. So it's completely self-contained. This is the supporting coach yards and station trackage south of the terminal. The terminal's right here, and then your roundhouse and all your coach yards, Pullman facilities. Pullman had a maintenance facility there at Dallas Union Terminal. It was a really bustling, big place. Hundreds of arrivals and departures a day. Here's a Santa Fe train coming through at night, being loaded, discharging passengers. And this is a menu that was, we're allowed to copy this menu. Gar Latham provided this menu here for the Union News restaurant. That's the only known photograph showing the entrance to the lunchroom on the second floor of the station. So this is an interesting picture here. This is kind of the peak years of Dallas Union Terminal, 1920s, the roaring 20s all the way through the 50s, the war years, certainly, 1941 to 44. But this is an interesting picture here. SMU was going to the Rose Bowl in 1936. And this is a photograph of 6 Texas and Pacific trains specially chartered to take all the SMU fans to the Rose Bowl. So they all departed Union Terminal within a few minutes of each other and just followed each other all the way out to T&P, the old Baird subdivision, all the way out to El Paso, and then they got on the SP Transcon line and went all the way to Los Angeles on the train. My dad was on that train. He was on one of those trains. Another shot of Texas and Pacific steam. I think it's interesting to see all the big signs and billboards in the background for Dallas. So this is the T&P station in Fort Worth. And the reason I talk about Fort Worth just a little bit is because we always neglect Fort Worth, and I feel like it needs to have a mention in the Dallas Union Terminal story. Fort Worth never got a Union Station. They ended up building a station in addition to the Santa Fe station that we saw earlier. That the Santa Fe P built a massive station in Fort Worth because they were based there. And this is basically their office building, but down below on the first floor is a magnificent waiting room and station facilities. Of course, this building still stands today. It's now lofts, and also the TRE and TexRail commuter lines use the station tracks in the first floor. But I mention it because they never got a Union Station, so this was as close as they got. But it is a magnificent structure. It was built because the original TNP station burned in Fort Worth. It was a massive fire. I think they rebuilt it and used it for a few more years, but they had plans to replace it because it was becoming obsolete and it never really recovered from the fire damage. So the new station opened in '29. I can't remember, I think this fire was in 1922, but I could be wrong about that. But anyway, that station that predated it was destroyed. So we are proud to have in our collection in Frisco the switch engine that worked Dallas Union Station. This is number 7. There was only one, but this is a locomotive that switched all the trains, all the sleeping cars and mail cars, and built passenger trains and took them apart at Dallas Union Terminal for many, many years, 1923 to 1963. And that's now preserved at our museum. We think it got number 7 because there were 7 railroads that originally participated in the Dallas Union Terminal that managed it. This is just a street scene. This is in front of the station on the north end, where you have some of the baggage and express facilities. And you can see the cab stand where all the cabs are coming in. This is a 1928 Cadillac, I think, right there. And just people loading into the terminal, getting ready to arrive at the park at the station. So getting back to all the stairs, the Katy Railroad built a suburban depot, I think in 1922. And in their timetables and all their advertising, they used to say, Highland Park Station, no steps to climb. And that was an incentive to get everybody to ride to Katy if they were going north. and it was also a good way to get them to the suburban station and not have to go all the way to downtown Dallas. This is kind of like the first hint of the suburbs of Dallas, okay? Because the Katy ran northward out of downtown and ran through like Mockingbird Lane and, kind of that way, and then went eastward to Greenville, up to Denison. But that was the Highland Park Suburban Station. It was torn down, I think, in about 1972, somewhere along there. So as the station grew, so did Dallas. This is a wonderful photograph, circa, I'm thinking probably about 1948. There's the Mercantile Bank building. And you can see how the station just basically has become a hub of the west side of Dallas and all the cities, all the buildings that grew up as a result of it. So this is interesting because the station endured the Depression, World War II, and then they decided it needs a facelift. It's getting old, it's getting kind of tattered, it's getting tired, and being Dallas, they wanted something new and bright and shiny and something that because again, it was still considered the front door to Dallas, so we need to kind of spruce it up a little bit. So they put together a committee of people, business leaders and public figures, and they formed a committee. They did several things around Dallas, but Union Terminal was one of the studies that they did. What are we going to do about Union Station? It needs work. So Woodall Rogers, of course, the very famous mayor of Dallas, they decided they were going to build a new building and create more of a park-like setting at the original location. And George Dahl, one of the great architects, was involved in this. He designed a lot of buildings at Fair Park. He's known for Dallas architecture. So they came up with a recommendation to build basically a new and revamped Union Station, Union Terminal. So, and these just came to light in the last year or so in a collection that we got, and we opened an envelope, and all of a sudden we saw a plan to redesign Union Station. We'd never seen it. Nobody had ever heard of it before. It must have gotten shelved because it never happened. And we were absolutely amazed at this plan. So we scanned it and we put it in this program. So what they were going to do is build if I get my orientation here, the original station right here. They were going to build a new station on the west side, keep the terminal trackage, but build a new station with a new facade on the west side with a whole new entrance off Industrial Avenue, entrance and parking and everything. And the old station would just become kind of a support facility, but the new entrance would be this way, a whole new way to get to the station. And as you can see here, there's the old station, there's downtown, here are the station tracks, a beautiful new sort of deco design right here where it's been highlighted, and then coming in this way, and a park and a plaza out front. Great idea, and it's got George Dahl all over it if you follow that architecture. If it looks similar to the Hall of State in Fair Park, there's a reason, because he designed the Hall of State and several other Fair Park buildings. Wonderful plan. Well, they went to the railroads, and they said, we want to do this. And the railroad said, we're not doing that. You got your station. We're not doing that again. And this is also after the war, 46, 47, when passenger rail was not, they weren't investing in it as much as they used to. The railroads saw the writing on the wall, even right after the Second World War, this is not worth our investment. And so it never came to pass. And like I say, we never knew about the existence of this until recently. We're still doing research on it. Okay, so the post-war years, where you got into the streamliner era of passenger train operations, was really a fascinating time for Union Terminal. And the railroads did invest in their equipment. They did invest in their rolling stock. This is a wonderful photograph at Union Station of the Southern Pacific's Sunbeam that ran fast train down to Houston, where they streamlined the steam locomotive to make it look more modern, right next to a brand new streamlined stainless steel diesel on its competitor, which was the Sam Houston Zephyr that ran down to Houston. They were arch competitors between Dallas and Houston. Now, what Dallas did do is they decided to address the stairs. They already had escalators. In fact, Union Station, when it got escalators, I think in the 30s, it was one of the first cities, one of the first buildings in Dallas to have escalators was Union Station. And that's how you could get up to the waiting room, but you still had to go down these awkward stairs to get back down to the platforms and the trains. So the city decided, and the railroads did cooperate with this project, to go underneath the tracks and build a tunnel. So as trains are going overhead, arriving and departing, they are digging this massive underground tunnel under the station to, that's a great picture, that's from the Dallas Public Library. They're actually going to put a tunnel, and if you've been to that station, I don't know if you've ever been down in the tunnel, but you know there's no stairs down to that tunnel, there's ramps, okay, and that was intentional. There's ramps going down from the station building itself, and then ramps coming up to the tracks, no steps. And as you can see in this photograph, that's where they made the cut. And this would be a new entrance facade, and they would build a new parking lot to the west of the station tracks. So not exactly what they recommended in that plan, but it did have elements of it. So this, the west portal is beginning to take shape here. This is the overhead concourse right here. And then you can see that, and it has two sides to it. And then finally they built the entrance facade where you enter the tunnel going underneath the tracks. The overhead concourse is still in place. The railroads ended up putting offices up here. But you can see the entrance portal. And this lasted for a long time, up until the 70s. Anybody know who that is? That's Salvador Dali. For some reason, he thought it was interesting to take his picture. This is what's interesting. This is going down a ramp from the station, so the door is vertical, but the ramp is at so many degrees going down, and I guess he thought that was interesting. I remember that door. That door is still, it's covered up now, but it's still there. But they put tile down there. Then they also modernized the first floor. They basically started taking all the foot traffic away from the upper waiting room and put it down on the first floor. And they put marble. This was so typical of postmodern architecture. You know, cover everything with marble, it'll look better. So that's the first floor. And they started moving ticketing and waiting and everything down there. It's transitioned over a few years. There's an escalator going upstairs. But it got that postmodern look, which is really neat today, but it kind of ruined the station, I think. That leads to the tunnel from the waiting room. baggage lockers. So the second floor, the main waiting room, began to kind of languish. I think this was taken in maybe the late 50s, early 60s. They did a little bit of blackout on some of the windows. I don't know if that was for the war, but it began to languish. And eventually, when they were building a new Dallas Public Library, they moved all the collections over to Union Terminal, and the entire second floor waiting room, that grand hall, was stacks for the Dallas Public Library for a few years. It was temporary storage. It's an interesting use. The restaurant closed, and this is one of the very few photographs that exists of the restaurant taken after it closed, obviously. But meanwhile, outside, you still had a lot of activity. You had a lot of post-war passenger train activity in and out of the station. It was still a bustling place. I think that may be the Texas Zephyr, maybe the Sam Houston Zephyr. Texas Zephyr went from Dallas to Denver. T&P was still a big tenant at the station, running their Transcon trains from El Paso to Texarkana, with through service up to St. Louis and down to New Orleans. Rock Island was still very busy there. This is probably the Twin Star rocket to Minneapolis, St. Paul. Frisco still had passenger service in and out of the station. I think this was the Black Gold that ran up through Frisco and up to Tulsa. This is probably taken in the late 50s, early 60s, just showing activity on the south side of the building. You can see the Dallas Morning News plant is already built there. And you can see how it drops off right here. So in 1955, Santa Fe built a line from Denton to Garland. It's called the Denton Cutoff, and it goes to a junction called Zaca Junction in Garland. They built a suburban station called the White Rock Station at about where Jupiter Road and LBJ are today. It didn't last very long. 55 was when it opened because the Texas Chief would split off at Gainesville and run a section to Dallas. And it had a stop at White Rock, and it also had a stop at a new station in Garland. So that was a big deal. That train came off in '67. It didn't last very long.
My sister and I rode that because we lived in Greenville, and we
Yeah.
were gonna take. Mom and Daddy didn't want to go all the way down to Dallas to put us on the train to go to Kansas to stay with our grandparents. And so they would drive us from Greenville to White Rock Station, and we would catch this train, and we would go up, and like you said, to Gainesville, we bypassed Dallas and the whole thing, so this is our life right here.
Yeah. A lot of people figured out what you could do without
Yeah.
having to go downtown. It was a brilliant move on Santa Fe's part to do
We
that.
loved it.
It's too bad that it didn't last. The reason it didn't last is because in '67, the Postal Service pulled all the mail contracts from the railroads. A lot of these little secondary trains came off as a result of that. Another interesting day in the life of Union Terminal, that's the devastating tornado of 1957. It was in Oak Cliff. It wasn't too far from the station. I think that's taken from the Dallas Morning News building with the telephoto lens looking across the station. It appears to be closer than it is, I think. Another great shot. This is a postcard I really think is neat for Dallas. You can already see the South and Life building is there. So this is probably about 1960, maybe. A lot of activity at the station. It's a rainbow of train cars. All the through trains that had connecting services. And everybody's, I think that's an Atlantic coastline car. Anyway, a lot of through traffic, so you had a lot of sleeping car service in and out of the station. But the writing was on the wall for Union Station. I always like to include this photograph. The local homegrown Braniff Airlines was expanding at Love Field, and people were beginning to fly more. And really the writing was on the wall after the war, certainly through the late 1950s, that passenger rail was on the decline. So it's kind of a sad story, really starting about 1958. It lasted about 10 years, and then just one by one, a lot of the trains began to come off. This is a discontinuance of service notice for the Texas Zephyr between Dallas and Denver up to Amarillo. And you had to petition the Interstate Commerce Commission to discontinue a train. You couldn't just take it off. You had to petition the ICC. They had to do hearings. Generally, they did not approve these train-off petitions. You had to go through maybe 3 or 4 or 5 iterations over several years, and they'd finally grant it. You'd show all your losses, and that's a whole other story. But finally, they would approve that these trains would be pulled out of service. So they would post these at all the stations. So in '67, you lost a lot of trains because of the mail contracts. But the last holdout was the Texas and Pacific's Texas Eagle that ran between El Paso and Texarkana. And it ran all the way until, I think it was May 31st, 1969. And that was the end of passenger rail service on the TNP and through Dallas. No more passenger trains. Very sad day. And the station closed. And it was deserted. And then, what are they going to do with it? Well, they were concerned the railroads would just tear it down because they don't have it used for anything. They don't want to pay taxes on it, and they don't want to maintain it. So it was, there was a real concern that they would.
Tom, who owned the land?
It was owned by the railroads.
So they would, even though they tear the building down, they would have owed taxes on land.
Yeah, they probably still would have owned taxes on the land, just not the improvements. That was typically how they do. I wish my board chair was here because he's a tax accountant. Boy, he knows that stuff. I think it's a picture I shot back in 1969. You had this great train station and no trains. It's really sad. So what happened is the city of Dallas ended up buying the station and the land and all the terminal facilities and everything. Dallas bought it. And this is at a time when the city was kind of going through a little bit of a gestation about public transit and investing in the central business district still with public dollars. And Amtrak had already gotten underway. Amtrak started in 1971. And what they proposed to do is make it a transit and rail hub for Dallas, which made perfect sense. It essentially came to pass. That's Mayor Wes Wise dedicating the building in 1974. I think Adeline Harrison, who is considered one of the founders of DART, and several other prominent people at that time got together and got this legislation through to buy the terminal and rehab it. When Amtrak started in '71, there were a lot of issues with getting passenger rail service back on the old T&P Missouri Pacific lines, and they fought it in court for a couple of years. So that was in '71. The day the station was rededicated in that previous slide, it was also the inauguration of the Inter-American, Amtrak's first rail service into Dallas. It was from, at that time, was from Laredo up to St. Louis, I believe. This is opening day. I was actually down there somewhere. And they opened a visitor center. I skipped school to go to that. And that's the Inter-American, which is now the Texas Eagle today, coming into Dallas from St. Louis. And they had to get a court injunction to get this train to depart St. Louis because the railroad still fought getting this train over their lines again. It was one thing to have a passenger train already on their line. It was another to get one inaugurated on their railroad. They were freight only back in those days, and they had to get a judge out of bed in the middle of the night to get this train out of St. Louis. You can see the Amtrak logo and the ticket window downstairs there. So the station was cleaned up, and they put some money back into it, and it became a train hub. And then they inaugurated another train. This is a little section of the Texas Chief on the Santa Fe line from Fort Worth, Chicago down to Houston. There was a section that was brought over from Fort Worth to Union Terminal. So there were 4 arrivals and departures a day back in the 70s. That's kind of a short little train that got tacked onto the main train in Fort Worth when it got over there. That's a rolling museum right there, because that's an old equipment. And you can see they've already cut the overhead concourse back. You can see across all the tracks. Not a whole lot of vegetation control there. And the concourse has been demolished. That was part of the master plan. So you can kind of see, this is the pre-Hyatt hotel days. And you can see the station on the west side of town here. They took down the butterfly train sheds in addition to the overhead concourse. And Amtrak continued to serve Dallas and flourish. And this is the Texas Eagle, probably in the 80s. And then along came DART, the light rail, and also the Texas, the commuter rail, the Trinity Railway Express. So that is, what Union Station sees today. The reason they call it Union Station is because in the days when that building opened, it was more of a terminal. Trains departed, they actually terminated in Dallas. There was not a lot of run-through passenger service. Most of the trains originated and terminated, even though it was built as a run-through station. That's kind of the distinction between the two. Got Texas landmark status. What is that, 1979? And of course, Reunion Tower and the whole Reunion redevelopment with Woodbine came through. This is a fairly contemporary picture of the lower downstairs waiting room now. And then there was a whole redesign done by Woodbine to convert the Grand Hall, the main waiting room upstairs, into a conventions facility as part of the Hyatt Hotel complex. Woodbine still manages this. It's the Hunt, it's part of Hunt family. And this is a kind of a rendering of what that is. You can't get up there anymore. You have to be able to book the space to get up there, so you can't go up there and take pictures anymore, not easily. It's a contemporary view of the station, showing all the activity. They did a rehab and a refit in right around the centennial for the station, 2016, 2015. And they were very, very sympathetic to a lot of the original fabric upstairs. This was uncovered as part of the rehab and the reconfiguration of the upper waiting room. That had been covered up for probably 60, 70 years, that window. That's original from 1916. And they restored it. So they did a really nice job of that. The station celebrated its centennial in 2016, which we participated in that. Another shot of dark. They did put some butterfly train sheds back out. And then just a few years ago, they named it the Eddie Bernice Johnson Union Station. She was instrumental in protecting Amtrak in a lot of the attempts to kill it in Washington by more conservative people. And she was celebrated with her name being put on the station a few years ago, which I think was a very fitting thing to do. She was a very influential congresswoman for Dallas for many years. And then I just threw this in at the end here. You know, the Texas Special used to call on Greenville, as most of you probably know. That was Katie's flagship train. Trains 1 and 2 from San Antonio, Dallas, through Greenville, Denison, all the way up to St. Louis. And this is the timetable. This is from 1937, 38. So you can see that the train number 2, train 1 was the originating train out of St. Louis. Everything on the Katy was oriented from St. Louis. Train number 2 was the return leg. You can see it left Dallas at 7:30 in the morning. Got to Greenville, what, at 9:15, and then Denison. Then it ran all night, got to St. Louis Union Station at 7:30 in the morning, or 8:30, I'm sorry, on this side. There were other companion trains, but the Texas Special was their premier train. And then, almost done. In our collection, we have the dining car off the Texas Special. The only dining car preserved off the Katy, built in 1937. And we actually do special events in the car. We just had a big Valentine's dinner in there a couple of weeks ago. And Sherry and I had the pleasure of sitting together.
We did.
And we serve authentic railroad recipes and so forth. So we do a lot of cool programming at the museum. We call this immersion programming, where you actually become part of the exhibit. And that is it. I love doing this because it's one of the great side stories of what we do at the museum.
Any questions?
Yeah, I got a question. Okay, going back to the 1930s and 40s in its heyday, okay, we saw the ticket windows.
Mm-hmm.
Did each individual railroad, did they provide the clerks, or did the Union Terminal Company actually provide the clerks and the men out on the tracks? Did you hire out with the Union Terminal Railroad, or did you hire out with the Frisco or the Rock Island to work there?
That's a really good question. And from what I know, the Union Terminal Company had its own employees. I know they had red caps, station manager, dispatchers, and in the ticketing side, when you were issued a Union Terminal ticket stock for many, many years. I think the railroads all had agents there representing the railroads, but I'm pretty sure, to answer your question, they also had, at the ticket windows, they worked for the Union Terminal.
Okay.
And then they had red caps and everybody else.
At your facility in Frisco, do y'all have any, I've got an 8-year-old great grandson I'd like to bring out there. Is there anything special coming up that would be the day I should bring him?
Well, we have a couple of things. One is we have a model train display called Traintopia, and I think we've got some rack cards that we're going to put out. It's a 2,500 square foot model train that operates. The kids love it. They just go crazy. It's year round. It's indoors. You can go in the summer and it's nice and cool. And then we give guided tours outside of the collection, take them through the trains. That's on Wednesday through Saturdays. If you go to historictrains.org, you go to our website, you can read all about it. It is age appropriate for somebody that age. And then we do the Day Out with Thomas event in Grapevine. It's our biggest fundraiser. That's in the fall, where you can ride the Grapevine train, and we partner with them, and it's a Thomas and Tank Engine event and so forth. You go ahead.
I've never been in a caboose, but as a child, I watched the caboose go by.
Yeah,
And I always said if I was gonna change my name, it would be Caboose.
caboose.
Do you have a caboose for me?
Yes, we do. We have 4 cabooses, or caboose. Yeah. We have 2 Santa Fe cabooses, one off the Cotton Belt and one off the line that ran into Washington, D.C. And you can, I think John takes you in one. I think you go in the Cotton Belt caboose. Yeah, you can go inside a caboose.
And also, my very best friend's, her grandfather was killed in Fort Worth by his personal gun, so the headline said, climbing into the caboose, and he was a railroader.
Well,
He was climbing into the opening in the top.
Oh, boy.
And his gun shot
Oh,
some
no.
stuff.
Yeah.
So I've got that article which made front pages.
Yeah, that's a tragic accident.
She's deceased.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So you had the freight used to go through downtown Dallas,
Mhm.
now it goes around Dallas.
Mhm.
Did they have to put new terminals or something for the freight to be unloaded at?
Yeah, they did. That's probably worthy of a slide. Yeah, they did. The Southern Pacific Railroad built a freight terminal building further south on the south side of the Central Business District, and they accessed it from the old original line from the south. And then Santa Fe built a complex of buildings. A lot of them still stand. They were freight warehouses and so forth, and they actually had tracks that went under the city for several blocks to get into that, so it didn't congest the city. Yes, they did build around the perimeter. They built freight terminals, yeah. Particularly Southern Pacific and Santa Fe.
Were you involved in the moving of that big boy from Dallas
Oh,
to
yes.
Frisco? To me, that was a historic event in itself to watch that.
You know, that was the most anticipated and obviously the most fascinating thing to watch. It gave us the least amount of trouble. You know, it performed beautifully. It took a lot of preparation, but yeah. Sometime I'll do a whole thing on the move.
You guys could come back up here and talk about moving from the Fair Park
Yeah.
area to Frisco. That would be worth.
It's an amazing feat.
Did you have to fire it up or just?
No, we just towed it, yeah. And do a lot of prep work, but no, it did fine.
Well, and I've had some people tell me they remember, when they were young, or their parents, they would catch the train here to go into Dallas for the day and then come back. And there's like a
Oh, yeah.
long
Oh, yeah.
memory.
We did that.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing, you talk about the long haul, but there was a lot of short haul traffic as well. Yeah, that was a big deal, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much. And this month, other things coming up. On March 21st, we have Dr. Sarah Kalini is going to be doing a program on the history of the Declaration as part of the 250th anniversary. March 27th, there's Easter After Dark, so you might want to get your tickets. And next month's program is going to be John and Lainey Zaga is going to be talking about their trip to Antarctica. So that's going to be fascinating as well. So again, thank you all for coming today. Enjoy. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.